Shay, we do also have some fun aspects of this podcast to continue on. We move from trivia to superlatives. You dropped a superlative article for every signee from the high school ranks for LSU. That's at thebengaltiger.com. Check it out. Again, 7-day free trial before $30 gets you locked in until September on that quote unquote annual deal. Shay, this group, we're going to kind of expand this into more of a broader scope. You gave the superlatives for the signees, but let's start out with a little bit of fun. Who was your biggest hit of the cycle? Who's the guy that stands out to you the most for whatever reason, as far as LSU hitting on this target and landing him and signing him in the 2023 recruiting class out of the high school ranks?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm cheating, and I'll just choose one of the highest ranked. I will say Deshaun Womack, because you went Lance Hurd, who they signed out of Neville, 5-star, number 2 offensive tackle in the country, must get, right? Like, great addition. He's in Louisiana. You had an early offer out to him, all that. They had to go out and get Deshaun Womack with a new coaching staff. So that's a 5-star. That's a top 12 player in the country on 3, regardless of position. That's one of the best edge rushers in the class, which is one of the most valued positions you can have in the SEC, certainly. Instant impact guy, will play next year. So yeah, I'll choose Deshaun Womack, and largely because I'm voting him over Hurd because they had to go far away to get him. So that's a big hit.
So I would say I'm torn on mine, and that's mainly because, you have Deshaun Womack, who, they ended up having to hold off Georgia multiple times to sign him. And he is kind of that 5-star that, one that stands out the most. The biggest hit for me, though, and I view recruiting cycles in a way, and recruiting classes, that partly in this light. LSU has its top 5 class. It's a very good class. But how did they do when they went out and had their list of targets, and they said, all right, we're going to target these guys, and those are the ones we're going after. Those are our top ones. How did they fare? And I guess this is kind of more of a coaching staff grade. How did they fare going after those top targets? And if you look at Brad Davis, for example, I mean, he hit on 4 of the 6 top targets. Chase Bisontis and TJ Shanahan, ended up going elsewhere. I'm not that high on TJ Shanahan. I think LSU got the better end of the deal, but he did very well. To kind of build off of that in the biggest hit department, part of me wants to go and say JV and Toviano, and that's going to be my final answer, at least, because Texas A&M, Georgia was in the final picture. Oregon, Michigan had him up for a visit. A lot of these schools did a really good job recruiting him, really were after him hard, but LSU in the end, lands him just like everyone expected them to. And it wasn't necessarily close. And that's kind of similar to Deshaun Womack. It wasn't close. They got him on board. They got Javian Toviano late in the class, but Deshaun Womack ended up not being close. Georgia was coming hard, but LSU had him in their grips, and they weren't letting go, and it wasn't close. But you look at Javian Toviano, he's kind of the same way. They held that momentum, and they never faltered for an in-state kid in Texas that Texas and Texas A&M both wanted. They both wanted him to come on campus. Didn't end up even happening. He just signs with LSU. That is a huge hit. That is as impressive as a job as Deshaun Womack is. That's right up there with the top 3 overall jobs on a recruitment that I think LSU did all cycle, in my opinion. They get a little bit more credit with guys in Louisiana, I think, being able to keep them at home, and it just kind of works out, even though this cycle is kind of weird on that front overall. But you go into a neighboring state with the prospect that's so highly touted, and you lead basically from the end of summer all the way through. There were schools that were challenging. There were schools that were trying to make it hard on him not to go to LSU, but LSU just fended them off left and right. And so I think JV and Toviano is the biggest hit in the class in that regard. And I'll give an honorable mention, maybe 2, out to Jaylen Brown, who didn't end up visiting anywhere else. Kind of same story. You got to give Cortez Hankton a lot of credit on that one. And then I'll say Whit Weeks as well. Georgia wanted him. Oklahoma wanted him. Ole Miss wanted him. I mean, those are schools, especially Georgia and Oklahoma. You have Brent Venables, and you have the back-to-back national champions wanting this kid, and especially for Georgia in-state, a Georgia legacy. LSU got him on board early, and he never wavered. I mean, I know his brother's on the team, but Witt was one of those leaders in the class, had a terrific senior season. We bumped him all the way up into the number 110 overall and top 10 linebacker. That is a really good recruiting job as well for Matt House, who also flipped Christian Brathwaite. So I'll give some honorable mentions out on that front as well.
I thought when you led off with your monologue there about ordering your board and all that, I thought for sure you were talking about Whit Weeks, because if you think about it, Billy, we can think back over the summer when they weren't getting Tackett Curtis, they weren't getting Jaden Osbury, and we would talk to LSU sources and they would say, well, we're all in on Whit Weeks. And he was a 3-star, lower-ranked guy. His brother was on the team. We hadn't even seen his brother play at that point. This was over the summer. He had just come in from Virginia. And we had sources telling us, no, Whit Weeks is better than those guys. He's better. We like him more. And it just sounded like, yeah, okay, coach speak. Like, you're not getting the 2 Louisiana kids, so you're pumping up this other guy you got. Well, what do you know? I'm looking at the On3 rankings right now. They went final. Whit Weeks is the number 9 linebacker in the country. Tackett Curtis, the number 19, and Jaden Osbury, the number 21. So when the dust settled, LSU was right. They said, here's our order. We've got Whit Weeks the highest. He ultimately does finish the highest in the recruiting rankings with a really great senior year. So yes, that's one I would totally agree with. That's a nice hit.
Yep. Now we got to bring the mood down just a little bit, but this is it's not fun to talk about from the LSU sense, but it is always interesting to see where prospects go that don't end up at LSU, whether they were commits, whether they were top targets. We're going to kind of do a miss-loss, a biggest miss, biggest loss part of the pod now. This is where it can kind of get interesting. We both talked before. We have the 2 obvious losses, I think, when it comes down to it, and then we'll kind of do the biggest miss as well, just target that went elsewhere. So you want to lead off on this one, because this was a recruitment that I went out, saw the young man, had contact with his mom, and obviously he goes elsewhere. But go ahead, Shay, take it over.
Which word are we doing first, the loss or the miss, or both at the same time?
Let's do the loss. Let's do the loss first.
Okay, loss means they were once committed. I'll go Dalen Austin. I mean, we mentioned they signed 1 true high school corner, and Dalen Austin is a top 10 to 15 cornerback in the country and a return guy, and he had a really good senior year, which I think is a nice indicator of some future success in college. Maybe my answer is mitigated a bit because they got 4 corners out of the portal, including Denver Harris. But still, I thought that, like, that day signing day, when everyone was freaking out that Desmond Ricks was going to Bama and not LSU, very quietly, Dalen Austin flipped to Oregon, because people were like, well, we knew he was going to. It was trending that way. Y'all were telling us he was probably flipping, and they didn't even care. And the reality was Dalen Austin might be just as good as Desmond Ricks, at least in the short term. So I'll go Dalen Austin.
And I'll add on Dalen Austin, too, that, we talked about biggest hit and how well you can, target someone and get them. I mean, Oregon, you got to give him credit on that. They quietly worked him. He was on campus a couple of times. His old trainer's up there. But, his mom even said, we're signing late. We're signing late. I mean, lo and behold, Oregon gets him, and I'm pretty sure he enrolled early too. So just a total masterclass on how to get a kid late. Kind of reminded me of like Rakim Jarrett when he ended up flipping away from LSU all those years ago, and LSU got the better end of that one. We'll see on Dalen Austin. My biggest loss, Deron Reed. Nothing LSU could do on this one, but obviously position of need at defensive tackle is just one of those. You always hear about the South Georgia Auburn group that's in there, and boy, they certainly locked in and had a top target at Carver High School in Georgia, and he made those visits. He was at Auburn a good bit. He was right down the street, and they didn't even have a coach, and he flipped. And so that just tells you there was nothing really else you could do. But as far as needs and as far as talent, that was a big loss, I feel like, in the recruiting class. And obviously, Jamar Cain has to hit on defensive tackles next cycle. I think, if he would have been able to see Auburn coming that hard, that late, maybe he doesn't even move on Deron Reed as a top target, because LSU surged from the spring into the summer, beat out Ohio State, beat out Clemson, beat out Auburn. But in the end, again, LSU couldn't do anything about it. and he goes to Auburn. So a big loss in that respect, and one that now makes defensive tackle an even bigger priority in 2024. Who's your biggest miss of the cycle?
I mean, I'll go realistic because, like, I could say Arch Manning because he's in Louisiana, but he was not ever going to go to LSU. I'll stick in Louisiana and I'll say Derek Williams. He was safety. I felt like was a need. He was a very highly ranked safety throughout the whole process, a top 5 safety type player. I know they signed a top 5 safety in Toviano, but you'd love to have a couple of them at least. And Kylan Jackson, they signed some good safeties, but I just feel like being in state, Derek Williams was the one in my mind, like of the Tackett Curtis, Jaden Osbury, Arch Manning, Eli Holstein, these highly ranked guys that were going to leave the state. I thought he was maybe the one that was set to leave the state that they could reel back in, or that maybe they could get him not to commit to Texas over the summer. And ultimately didn't happen. He goes to Texas, but I'll go Derek Williams as my miss.
Part of me wants to go Jaden Wayne, but obviously LSU signed Deshaun Womack. I'm gonna go with Dante Moore, and here's why. It's kind of one of those things where, look, LSU had him on campus. There was a bunch of buzz around the Tigers in March. He was in for an official visit early on in the process. Maybe you wish that one would have been, back in June or something. But obviously one that NIL probably got a little out of hand on, I would say, in the end. But I saw him at the All-American Bowl in Texas, and he finished as a 5-star for a reason. I mean, that dude is awesome, and I think he's going to be a really good quarterback. And goes to Oregon, coach leaves. Kenny Dillingham doesn't even, get to bring him to Arizona State because UCLA swoops in and gets him. So that's one looking back, maybe the recruitment was a little bit, maybe there was more of a crack in the door to get him. And to have a quarterback like that, especially now that Walker Howard is gone, would have been, huge for LSU, I think. And Ricky Collins has some upside. He finished as a 4-star for On3. But Dante Moore, winner, multiple times, just put it together at all the big stages. He's awesome. And gosh, I know also wish we would have seen Jackson Arnold wait a little while and given LSU a chance, that's for sure. But those are the biggest losses, the biggest misses, and the biggest losses. Let's just finish up with these as far as our superlatives here. Who's your best position group?
If we're only doing high school, the O-line, because Brad Davis kept the 2 best O-linemen home in a 5-star in Lance Hurd, and then Tyree Adams out of St. Aug, who big wingspan, like has NFL measurables. We'll just have to develop and put it together. And you see that often. That's the kind of guys you want to go after. I mean, he's well built, isn't like he's got a bunch of fat on him or anything like that. So I like him as a prospect. And then they went into Georgia, which is one of the most talent-rich states you can recruit in. And they got 2 more offensive linemen. DJ Chester, you mentioned being a huge 4-star. He got a bunch of accolades. But Paul Mabenga is a really interesting ad because he was a former soccer player. He's only been playing O-line a little bit. Sadiq Charles, if you'll remember him, took kind of that same route, was a high school soccer goalie, and then started playing O-line late in his career, ends up going to the NFL. So I think that they drafted 4 guys who have NFL potential, and one of them, like as Lance Hurd, could be a 1st-round pick. So for me, O-line, definitely.
And then I'm going to go with wide receiver and look, bit of homegrown talent. And then also you go out of state in 2 different states and very highly competitive states for both of the prospects they got. You land Shelton Sampson, huge deal, top 100 player out of Baton Rouge, and a really good kind of raw prospect. I mean, he has all the tools and potential to be one of the greats. And he'll have to put it together. He's kind of up and down, had a really good senior season, but also had moments where, you see that potential rather than that true production, and then goes to Under Armour and kind of the same thing. Very, very talented player. A lot of programs wanted him. They were after him, trying to get him in there. It was a little sketchy here and there, but LSU locked him in, got him on board early. That was huge. Then in Louisiana, kind of another versatile piece, Kai Prian, signing with LSU out of St. James. He's a 4-star. He's got potential again. He missed some time as a junior. He missed a little bit of his senior season at St. James, but was still highly productive. He could be one of those sleeper wide receivers we look back on, like a Jeray Jenkins or a DJ Chark, that kind of comes around at LSU and finds themselves and reaches their potential. Again, with him kind of just continuing to put it together overall is what we're kind of looking for. And he kind of has like a stocky build. He could even line up at running back at times. I really believe that, or maybe he's even a safety. But he's an interesting athlete at the wide receiver position for sure. And then you get into Kyle Parker, somebody they offered pretty late as far as where he was at in the recruiting process. Texas was on him. Louisville was on him. Louisville made a huge push. And LSU got him on board for a visit. And I don't think he ever even made the Texas visit. He locked it in. His family's from Louisiana originally. And he is an explosive slot player. Shout out Hester on the board. Always bringing him up as somebody who's underrated. And as far as polish, as far as guys who are ready to compete right away, Kyle Parker's right up there. He's got those tools as a slot to potentially be in the mix early on for playing time. I know they added Aaron Anderson. They have a bunch of receivers coming back, but that polish will help him at the next level. And he could factor in the punt and kick return games as well. Had multiple of those taken back to the house as a senior at Lovejoy in Texas. And Texas didn't give up on him either, but he signs with LSU and he's on campus now with Jaylen Brown, who I think is probably the best receiver in LSU's recruiting class. I just feel like with his top end speed, his competitiveness, that was something that really impressed me at the All-American Bowl in San Antonio. Watching him was he wanted the reps. He wanted to show what he could do and show that, his senior season when he had some quarterback troubles wasn't really what, you're getting in him. He wanted to show that he has the speed, which he did. He wanted to show he has the hands. It was solid for most of the week. Had some drops here or there, but, he made plays. He got open. He was really productive all week in San Antonio against the best of the best. So I think that receiver group has really solidified the future of that room for years to come.
So when we talk about all this, then we're officially turning the page. 23 classes done, 24 classes here. Convince me otherwise of this, because people will say, okay, we don't need to dive into a million names right now. I just got done remembering and learning all the names from the last class. When you go through all of this and you think about the current roster, I go through on offense and I think quarterback, well, they've already got Colin Hurley committed. Running back, well, they've got 6 guys in the room. And I know in the back of my mind, 2025, the next class in Louisiana has 2 to 3, maybe top 5, 10 running backs in the country. So I move past it. Tight end, you just signed 3. Wide receiver, you just signed 4, and you've already got a bunch of talented ones. O-line, you signed 4, you're doing that every year. I go right back to defense and say, well, they need D tackles. They probably need young corners. They need some young linebackers. So for me, the needs kind of remain the same as what they were to end the 2022 or 3 cycle.
Yeah. I mean, look, I've got one of my friends works for Blue Northern Hard Seltzer in Austin. Check them out if you're down in the Austin area. But we got a drink, Shay, because you mentioned defensive tackle. And that is definitely one of those top needs. And I feel like as, Mason Smith gets into his draft year, Mekhi Wingo gets older, you have some guys coming up behind them and you've added some depth through the transfer portal. But you're right. The needs remain the same. Defensive tackle is the one that stands out to me the most. I just think it's time for that next elite defensive lineman, maybe in Louisiana, to end up at LSU. They have Dominic McKinley now on the offer list out of Acadiana. That was a big one that was dished out. He looks like everything you'd want in terms of drawing up a defensive tackle. They're also on Demarion Johnson, Melvin Hills. Not going to get into a ton more names beyond that, but they're also in on some others out there nationally. And that's the group that stands out to me the most. The other one I would say is probably safety.
It's good when Louisiana gives you those players. That's when LSU, by design, should usually be locked into a top 10 recruiting class based purely off just taking Louisiana guys. Whatever you can do outside the state is what pushes you into top 5. They actually finished top 5, Billy, now for 4 of the last 5 cycles. They've been in the top 5. The only time they weren't in the top 5 was last year when they only signed 15 high school kids because they were going through the transition. I think they finished 12. But when they've been taking full classes, they've been top 5 every year. So that's the beauty of being in Louisiana.